All right, welcome to the channel. And today we'll be talking about the FiiO R7, and this was actually sent over to me by a buddy of mine to check out, so I compare it with some of the FiiO stuff that was sent out by Apos for me to demo. So this is just my thoughts and opinions about this kind of very cool looking desktop amp, DAC, streamer, Android device all in one type deal. And we'll dive right into build and aesthetics and move into my thoughts on sound and final thoughts, who it's for, that kind of deal. So let's dive right into build and aesthetics. So build and aesthetics. This thing is fairly nice. It's aluminum. It's fairly thin siding, but it's to keep it kind of light and easy to move around. It comes with a couple of different of these platforms for it to sit on, and this one's the angled up one, and then it has a flat one, so it sits flat on the desk. Overall, a pretty cool device as far as look and aesthetics. Looking at the build wise though, build honestly fantastic. I have no issues with this at all. The paint on it is really well done. It doesn't really attract too much fingerprints. The screen of course does get a lot of fingerprints. I'm sure you can kind of see in the reflection there that there's, when you start touching on it, it does get a little bit, so you're gonna have to want to keep that relatively clean by wiping it down every so often. The overall feel of the volume knob and the kind of clickiness of the selector knob, it's pretty excellent, really nicely done. I really enjoy the feel and build quality of those type of things. The inputs are very nice. It's got a balanced XLR 4.4 and a 1/8 inch jack in for headphones. On the back you have basically balanced for speaker outs, powered speaker outs for such things as powered monitors like the SP3 from FiiO, or I have a pair of JBL 305s, I believe, Mark IIs, and those worked really well with this, and it controls it by switching it out to the pre-out, and that works great, honestly, for that regards. It also has the standard RCA connectors. It's got a local area network connection, optical ins, coaxial ins, has two of those, or sorry, optical in and coaxial in, and optical out and coaxial out. USB host and USB. Before we dive into sound, actually, I want to jump on to some of the things I had kind of issues with it regarding getting it to work the way I wanted it to work. And I've had a couple of people actually mention they couldn't get it to connect via DAC to like a computer without it having a weird time delay with the like say you're watching YouTube or Netflix, something like that. It would have a delay between the vocals and then the image on the screen. I didn't have that issue with my Mac. It did actually initially have that issue, but for whatever reason it kind of went away over time, or I just maybe acclimated to like that time delay of a little bit, but it wasn't massive for me, whereas other people I've heard had bigger issues with it. So something to be aware of. Maybe it was a software update, because I did update the software and it went away. Actually, I never actually had an issue with it after I updated the software. But that is something to think about. Also, it's an Android device, so if you're not familiar or comfortable using Android, which I am not, I'm now a full-time Windows and iOS user, and it was a little bit tough getting used to the Android like system, and it was just funny because I used to be a hardcore Android guy back in the day. The Android, if you're not used to Android, it can be somewhat kind of confusing and hard to move around and navigate. You can sideload stuff into it, but I would recommend not. I would just get the apps that you like to have, and or try to load your own music on it. And that's something you can do on the back. You can put a SD card with all your music on it, a USB like kind of SSD on there with all your music, and it should read that using the FiiO music app, or if you have something else you prefer, you can probably download that and put it on there. But like I said, Android was not my favorite use case for this. It looks fine, it works great and everything, but for me personally, it just hard to navigate because I'm so acclimated to the iOS world. Oh, one other thing was it was hard for me to get my FLAC files via SSD to actually work regularly on this, or even recognize them for the FiiO app. And I didn't really mess with it too much because I mostly just use streaming. I use Qobuz and Spotify, mostly Qobuz for dedicated listening and Spotify for background and music discovery. Just things to be aware of with this device. Regarding sound, it's an ESS DAC. So, and it's one of the higher end ESS DACs, but it's still an ESS DAC. And ESS is not my preferred signature. I prefer AKM or a little bit warmer, like a Burr Brown or I don't know, something along those lines. An R2R. I prefer that kind of sound signature with my DACs. And DACs are not the end all be all, like when it comes to audio and everything like that. But once you do hear the difference between the different kind of DAC chips, especially at the DAC chip level where it's the AKM, ESS, and like Burr Brown and et cetera, like Texas Instruments has a couple too. You can kind of narrow down what you prefer, right? And I've always been a big fan of the AKM sound signature. Not that I haven't heard an ESS that was, really well done. It sounds fantastic. This sounds really good too, but it does lean into the more of the highs and to more of the kind of like that brighter, cleaner signature, neutral, clean signature. It also utilizes THX amps, and I've never really been a fan of THX sound signature as well. It's always been too clean and too neutral, and just I always called it kind of like almost soulless to some level. It sounded fine. Like once preferences are taken out of it, it sounds fine. You're gonna enjoy it with the headphones that you have, what have you. And I played with multiple different headphones with this, so something to kind of think about. I went from Porta Pros to Stelia to my ZMF collection to the Rad Zeros. The Rad Zeros were my favorite of that bunch. The Rad Zeros just sounded excellent with it, and really enjoyed that signature, the way that the ESS brightened up the Rads a little bit, because I think I have a warmer tuning on the Rads I have here. It helped curb some of the ESS issues that I personally have. It helped it everything come into line to my preferences. Find synergy and move with it from there. I enjoyed it off the speakers I had here, the SP3s from FiiO, the KEF LS50 Metas. I did a little bit of playing with them, and the JBL 305s, and all of those were fine, worked great, no major issue regarding that. Okay, moving on into sound. The highs can get a little bit on the bright side. It's a very neutral and clean signature, and it's not horrible, but it definitely can start to get a little bit, I would say it pushes towards glaring a little bit on certain tracks. And depending on the headphones you're using and what have you, that's kind of my overall take on it, is that it's a very clean and neutral sound signature. Take that for what it is. Mids as well were very neutral, and they didn't really have too much warmth. They were still very clean, and that's kind of like the general sense of this device. Is the sound signature I got out of it was very clean and neutral sounding to my ears, and it wasn't my favorite, especially the mids. And I've noticed that with ESS in general with their DACs, for me, is that I prefer mids to be warm and lush and that kind of thing, and ESS always has been more of that clean and neutral sound signature, and it's not a bad thing, it's just my preferences don't align with that. So, and I know that, so I try to do my best to take that into account. So the mids, while very neutral and clean, they didn't really push very forward. They weren't very warm, and so they didn't really kind of grab me as much as some other DACs have, or kind of devices with AKM or R2R kind of deal. But it is what it is. And also I noticed that there was a bit of a, with the mids, it had a bit of this weird diffused sound, almost like where it was kind of pulled back, but also kind of like, it was clean and neutral, but it's kind of a contradiction, but it was also slightly diffused to me. Like the detail just wasn't quite as good as what the highs had. And it feels like the ESS, most of the focus is in the highs and the detail in the highs, whereas the mids kind of fall back a little, fall behind that. And then the lows were also clean. They were punchy, but I didn't find them to be as engaging or powerful as I would have preferred with my amps and DACs kind of thing that I usually go with. So take that for what it is. I think it kind of falls in line with the ESS kind of world, where they focus mostly on that detail and cleanliness and neutrality, and so I prefer a little bit more oomph, a little more warmth, a little more darkness in the low end. Going into use case and who I think this is best used for, I mean, this thing is, it's dope. I mean, this thing is super cool looking. It looks great. It works great overall, especially if you're an Android user and you know what you're using and getting into. I think you'd have a lot of fun with it. You can throw games on there if you want. You can load anything that Android can load. This can load basically. So if you want to put games that were like vertical, or you can do all sorts of stuff. Watch movies if you wanted to. I mean, all that kind of thing. But who I think it actually would be the best use case for is for people in smaller spaces or just want a cleaner desk setup. They don't want a lot of stuff on their desk. That would be who I'd go for. Probably like college kids in their dorm room, to people that just, you know, working in a smaller space. They don't want to have a lot of stuff. Or just minimalists. That's another factor. I mean, this would be a fantastic minimalist desk setup because it does everything and it's in this small little box, and it just put it on your desk and you can headphones, speakers, powered speakers, and good to go. Because it's a standalone device, you can literally put this anywhere as long as you have power and either FLAC files for the back for SD card, or you know what, have FLAC files that you can load onto it, or Wi-Fi so you can get, or network so you can get your streaming in. You can literally put this anywhere and basically have your audio file or your music listening scenario that you want. You can put it anywhere and good to go. So that's really cool. So if you have a niche case where you know, if you have a gym at home that you want to have a nice little audio setup in your gym, or if you have, you know, like a listening station, but you don't want to have it be all like crazy and large, and you just want a nice little nook in like the living room or whatever, you could have this be there and look clean and not look out of place. The wife acceptance factor would probably be fairly large with this. And the fact that you just sit someplace and put it anywhere and listen to your music is pretty high. I think that's a really good value there in that sense of what this could be used for. And where I think it shines is that mostly is the fact that you can literally take it anywhere as long as you have power and a connection or music that you can load up on it, and you're good to go. You have everything you need to basically listen to music. One of the cons I noticed was that it has this ability to have multiple different gain levels, and with those gain levels I noticed the higher up I went, the more glaring or bright it got, and I didn't really enjoy that too much with at least my setup, and so I always kept it mostly on the high gain mode. But I also noticed with that high gain mode, and even some of the higher ones, my ZMFs did not do well. Like, they did not like this amp. For whatever reason, the ZMFs did, at least in my opinion, were not fans of this. They didn't pair well for me. And it almost seemed like there wasn't enough power, even on the super high level gain. Like, there just didn't seem like there was enough power to really push the ZMFs to go where they needed to go, which is weird because it should technically have the power. They just didn't. It just didn't seem like it sounded that way. Even when I cranked the volume way up and was getting towards that 90% volume max, I don't feel like it got into the decibel range where it was actually would cause hearing damage or anything like that, and it just didn't seem like it had the oomph to really drive my ZMFs. So that's one of the cons. I also had some issues where trying to get things to connect the way I wanted them to connect was kind of I had to kind of really pay attention to it and work at it to get it to actually do what I wanted it to do sometimes. And that's probably more on my side, and I don't read instruction manuals. I just try to plug it in and go and see what happens, and then try to mess with it until I get it to work. That being said, once I did get to work the way I want it to work, it worked great and there was no problems. And I believe there's a R9 coming out, which is a more powerful amp that it's the same kind of deal, but it's a little bit, I think it's just basically more power. I think they're having an upgraded, some other upgraded things in it too as well, but it's going to be like the next step up from this, and that'll be kind of exciting to hear about what people think about that once that starts getting into people's hands. It's a pretty cool device. I do recommend it. It's something that's, if you need something minimalist and want something on your desk that's just does it all and you don't have to worry about it, or if you want to have a small little listening station or feel like you like to move around your house and want to listen to things, it's such an easy thing to just unplug it and plug in someplace else and you're ready to go. Like, you literally only need the power plug, and if you have Wi-Fi, you don't have to have a SD card or anything like that. And then the look is really, I love the honeycomb design. Everything about the build is nice. It's very light, actually, surprisingly light for how, like, the size of it. But yeah, overall, it's a very, very cool device, and I think it warrants looking at for sure, especially if you're like a minimalist, or if you want to be able to roam around your house with a listening station, or you're trying to find that perfect listening area that, if you're married with kids and you want to have a small little nook just to yourself, this would be great for that. So yeah, anyways, hope everyone has a good rest of their morning, afternoon, and evening. All right, cheers.